the servant beneath the silver crown. In a kingdom where the blood moon judges all sins, the one who bears the purest bloodline is the one forced to kneel, hiding her identity beneath the ashes of the past. The werewolf kingdom of Eldervale was decaying under an ancient curse. For 27 agonizing years, the throne forged from black steel of Alpha King Cassian Veyr had been shrouded in the shadow of death. Ever since the Crimson Night of Rebellion that claimed the lives of his beloved queen and infant daughter, the proud monarch's heart had turned into a fortress of ice. No royal heir could survive their first blood moon, and the kingdom stood on the brink of collapse as the last prince lay dying in his solid gold cradle. Deep beneath the palace's cold basement kitchens, where the light of the throne never reached, Clare existed like a fading shadow. She was a human servant, a flawed creature devoid of wolf instincts, always forced to bow her head and endure the contempt of the arrogant noble pack. Her only possession, and her sole reason for living, was Ivy, her 6-year-old daughter with strange half-gold, half-silver eyes, a trait always viewed as a sinister omen by the superstitious courtiers. Clare sought no power, nor did she dream of a perfect family. She only wanted to protect her daughter, desperately hiding that fragile little life from the barbaric blood sacrifice rituals of the royal council. Yet, fate always knows how to toy with those who seek to flee. During a failed nanny selection ceremony, when all the greatest sorcerers and the most noble Lunas watched helplessly as the infant prince drew his final breaths, a miracle emerged from the most unexpected place. It was Ivy's tiny hands that soothed the cruel curse. And in the middle of a great hall suffocated by silence, the tarnished silver bracelet wrapped around the child's wrist suddenly glowed, resonating with a royal magic thought to have been buried forever. An innocent question from a 6-year-old child shattered the ruthless king's wall of ice. A faint scent of first snow and laurel flowers, unintentionally lingering on the lowly servant woman, awakened the giant wolf slumbering within the Alpha King's mind. In just one night, Clare was dragged out of her safe darkness, thrown straight into the eye of a political storm. She became a suspect of stealing a royal relic, a pawn in the eyes of treacherous schemers, and perhaps the only key to deciphering the tragedy of the throne. But if that silver bracelet truly belonged to the deceased princess, then what was Clare's true identity? And who had orchestrated a web of lies for nearly 3 decades to plunge a dynasty into a sea of blood? Amidst a suffocating political cage named Bloodline, amidst the cruel plots of the nobility, and beneath the oppressive aura of a king torn between his grief and the awakening of his instincts, Clare would have to make a choice. She had no sharp fangs, no pointed claws, no mighty magic. The only thing she possessed was the unyielding heart of a mother willing to tear down an entire kingdom to protect her child. The crown had never been a sweet glory, it was a cage forged in blood. And that lowly servant would be the one to break every rule with her own hands to rewrite her own destiny. Chapter 1. The Child Who Called to the Throne. The atmosphere inside the great hall of Eldervale Castle was heavy enough to suffocate any frail creature that accidentally wandered in. The flickering beeswax candles on bronze sconces were not enough to dispel the cold darkness blanketing the marble walls carved with royal wolves. On the highest dais, the throne forged from black steel and pure silver radiated an oppressive, chilling aura. At the foot of that throne, Clare knelt, carefully using a rough rag to wipe away the bloodstains that had yet to dry on the cold stone floor. It was the duty of a lowly maid, one with diluted blood and no wolf, assigned to clean up the aftermath of a failed nanny selection ritual. A noble woman had just been rejected by the protective magic of the royal cradle, causing her to stumble in a panic and drop her wine glass, mingling its contents with a few drops of blood oozing from her palms scraped against the stone. Clare only wanted to keep her head down, quickly mop up those humiliating stains, and disappear before the pure-blood wolves remembered her existence. A commoner like her was absolutely forbidden from looking directly at the throne, let alone allowing her little daughter to stand so close to the solid gold cradle of the dying newborn prince. Ivy, her 6-year-old daughter, obediently shrank back behind the rough, ash-stained fabric of her mother's apron. The little girl clung tightly to her mother's leg, her strange half-gold, half-silver eyes stealthily observing the resplendent figures pacing the hall. The tense silence was torn apart by the agonizing cries of the infant in the cradle. The cries did not carry the fierce vitality of a newborn life, but were broken, hoarse, and intermittent, as if that fragile existence was gradually being drained away. The kingdom of Eldervale had been bound by a cruel curse for the past 27 years. Every royal heir-born was sickly and could not survive their first blood moon. The child in the cradle was their last hope, but now, even the most noble Lunas and the wet nurses with the most powerful healing wolf blood stood by helplessly. Another useless fool. The sharp, cold voice of Lady Octavia, the powerful royal advisor, echoed from the council's tables. She crossed her arms over her chest, her disdainful gaze sweeping across the trembling crowd of nobles. A bunch of failures. Is there not a single one of you pure and strong enough to soothe the king's bloodline? Octavia's harsh rebuke forced the crowd into an even deeper silence. A few irritated glares began to dart around seeking a target to vent their anger on, and unfortunately, they landed on the small figures of Clare and her daughter. A noble lady lifted the hem of her velvet gown and stepped back, gently bringing a silk handkerchief to her nose, as if she had caught a whiff of something foul. She shot a look of utter disgust at Ivy and spoke in a piercing, sarcastic tone. "Look who is polluting our sacred air. A wolfless servant and a outcast child. May the gods have mercy. Those eyes on that child are truly hideous, a fitting ill omen for the prince's life." Clare bit her lower lip until it bled, struggling to swallow the humiliation clawing at her chest. Her hands gripped the cleaning rag so tightly her knuckles turned pale white, but she dared not fight back. She only hastily reached out to cradle Ivy's head, pressing her small face into her coarse dress, silently praying those venomous words would not pierce her child's tender soul. But the newborn prince's cries suddenly spiked, so piercing and agonizing that it sent the pack instincts of the werewolves in the hall into a panic. The infant turned purple, his breaths so faint they seemed about to extinguish entirely. Right at that moment, the temperature in the great hall plummeted. A colossal alpha aura, as cold and merciless as a northern blizzard, crashed down, crushing every inch of the air. All murmurs were instantly extinguished. The nobles bowed in unison, trembling as they held their breath. Alpha King Cassian Veyr had arrived. The Wolf King strode through the arched doorway with firm, long steps. The silver crown atop his head radiated a frigid light, accentuating a face of flawless angularity yet hardened by unspeakable grief. His ice-colored eyes swept over the cradle, carrying a despair suppressed beneath the ruthless facade of a monarch. He had lost his beloved wife and firstborn daughter in a crimson night of rebellion. Now he was about to watch the final drop of the royal bloodline perish. But in the moment the entire hall sank into absolute terror, an unimaginable event occurred. Ivy, the child who had always hidden behind her mother's back, suddenly broke free from Clare's embrace. The little girl was not crushed by the Wolf King's terrifying aura. With light, calm footsteps, Ivy approached the solid gold cradle under the horrified gazes of everyone present. "Ivy, no. Come back here." Clare gasped in horror, a bitter lump in her throat. She tried to lunge forward to grab her child, but two royal guards instantly crossed their sharp spears before her, forcing her to collapse onto her knees on the marble floor. Ignoring the indignant gasps of the nobles, Ivy stood on her tiptoes, extending her tiny arm to touch the edge of the royal cradle. The very second her thin fingers grazed the velvet blanket keeping the prince warm, the heartbreaking cries suddenly ceased. The purple-faced infant gradually regained a healthy pink hue, his breathing becoming extraordinarily steady and peaceful. The entire great hall fell into a terrifyingly eerie silence. No one dared to believe their own eyes. At the same time, the tarnished silver bracelet wrapped around Ivy's slender wrist began to turn searing hot. It did not emit a blinding light, but the ancient magic hidden within awakened, radiating a soft, silvery halo, as if answering the warmth of the slumbering royal life. Alpha King Cassian's sharp, cold eyes widened. He strode toward the cradle, ignoring the prince who had just escaped death, his gaze locked solely on the wrist of the 6-year-old child standing there. The breathing of Eldervale's most powerful monarch grew suddenly heavy, the scent of the blizzard surrounding him fluctuating violently. He recognized every engraved detail on that bracelet, recognized the royal sigil carved deep on the inside. It was the only token he had personally buried with his ill-fated infant daughter 27 years ago. Ivy slowly raised her head. She did not shrink back from the massive frame and the colossal pressure of the king. Her clear, half-gold, half-silver eyes looked up into Cassian's face, which was now tinged with shock and disbelief. She felt something warm and familiar swirling in the space separating them. Amidst the deathly silence of the hall, Ivy's childish yet echoing voice rang out, every word crystal clear. "Are you my grandfather?" That innocent question slammed down like a massive hammer, shattering the layer of ice that had encased Eldervale Castle for decades. The noble crowd's jaws dropped. Lady Octavia took a step back, the color draining from her face until it was as white as a sheet of paper. Clare felt her heart stop beating, her chest tightening in sheer panic. She knew her and her daughter's lives were about to be swept into a vortex from which there was no escape. Cassian stared intently into the child's eyes, his lips trembling slightly before his familiar ruthlessness quickly masked any vulnerable expression. He stood up straight, unleashing his full alpha aura so that no one dared to hold their head high, his voice ringing out with an irresistible, chilling authority. "Lock down all the gates. Take her and the child to the honored dungeon. No one is permitted to leave the palace until I have my answers." Chapter 2. The Bracelet of the Dead. The interrogation room of the Royal Council lay deep in the basement of the cathedral area, where thick basalt walls absorbed all sound and light. The air here always lingered with a cold scent of frankincense and the invisible threat of absolute power. Clare sat on a rigid wooden chair in the center of the room, her arms wrapped tightly around Ivy in her lap, as if fearing that should she loosen her grip even a little, the child would be snatched away by the surrounding shadows. She tried to keep her breathing steady, but the hand stroking the back of Ivy's shirt trembled ceaselessly. Across the long black oak table, Alpha King Cassian sat motionless like a statue carved from ice and snow, his dagger-sharp eyes pinned on the mother and daughter. Standing right beside him was Lady Octavia, the royal advisor, with a stiff face, her bright red lips pressed tightly together to reveal an undisguised hostility. "Where did you get that?" Cassian's voice rang out, not loud but enough to shake the thick air in the room. He pointed at the silver bracelet lying still on the oak table, the very thing the guards had stripped from Ivy's wrist when they brought them down here. Clare swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice from shattering under the oppressive aura of an alpha. "It was the only thing my adoptive mother left me before she passed away, Your Majesty. She said it was wrapped around my wrist when she found me abandoned at the edge of the forest." "Lies." Lady Octavia slammed her palm onto the table, cutting off Clare's words with a furious hiss. "You are a lowly servant without a single drop of wolf blood in your veins. How could you possess an item bearing the royal sigil of Eldervale? You, or whoever raised you, are surely despicable thieves who scavenged the royal crypts to steal the deceased princess's relics." Clare snapped her head up, her eyes flashing with the fierce resilience of a mother backed into a corner. Despite her lowly status, she possessed a dignity that refused to let anyone trample upon the honor of her late adoptive mother. "I am no thief, and neither was my mother. This bracelet has never brought me anything but unanswered questions. If it belongs to the royal family, you may keep it. I only ask to take my daughter back to the kitchens. Do you think things are that simple?" Octavia took a step forward, her hawk-like gaze piercing into Ivy's half-gold, half-silver eyes, which were hiding in the crook of Clare's neck. "This child possesses abnormal abilities. She can make the newborn prince stop crying. She dares to address the king with an insolent title. She is a dangerous seed. Your Majesty, I suggest handing this child over to the clerics at the cathedral. We need to draw a little of her blood to check if she carries any dark charms or forbidden magic aimed at the throne." Octavia's suggestion felt like a bucket of freezing water splashed directly onto Clare's soul. All her defenses crumbled, replaced by the fierce protective instinct of a mother. Blood drawing in the cathedral was never a safe ritual for children, especially those suspected of harboring dark magic seeds. Countless little souls had entered that place and never returned to the sunlight. Clare tightened her arms around Ivy, her eyes burning with a fire of unyielding defiance as she stared fiercely up at the powerful king seated above.
No.
Absolutely no one is allowed to take her away. Cassian furrowed his brows slightly. The outright defiance of a wolfless one was something he had never encountered in all his years of ruthless rule. He slowly stood up, walking around the oak table. Each of his footsteps dragged a heavy alpha aura that weighed down on her frail shoulders, forcing her to breathe with difficulty. When Cassian stopped right in front of Clare, his massive silhouette blocked all the candlelight, engulfing the mother and daughter in cold darkness. "Do you understand what you are refusing, wolfless one?" Cassian's voice was hoarse, carrying the pressure of 10,000 legions. "You are refusing the command of a king. I could crush you to dust with a mere lift of my hand, and no one in Eldervale would dare speak a word of mercy." Clare's chest ached as if crushed by thousands of boulders, her breaths became ragged, yet her arms holding her child did not waver in the slightest. She looked straight into his icy eyes, every word spat through her teeth full of unwavering resolve and tragic indignation. "A king can take my life, but he cannot take my child. You can bury me beneath this cold stone, but if you or anyone dares to let a single drop of Ivy's blood fall, your soul will never find peace." Silence enveloped the room. Cassian stopped dead in his tracks. He looked deeply into the unyielding eyes of the petite woman before him. A strange, agonizing, and suffocatingly familiar feeling suddenly surged in the monarch's chest. That absolute determination to protect her child at all costs, that unwavering, defiant gaze, he had seen it in Luna Catherine, his late wife, on that fiery night years ago. This woman's fragile scent lacked the characteristic musk of a wolf, but the moment she summoned her desperate protection, a faint scent of first snow and laurel flowers suddenly swept through the air. Faint, but enough to make the wolf inside Cassian stir restlessly. Just at the moment the tension seemed about to snap, a dry click rang out, drawing everyone's attention. The tarnished silver bracelet on the wooden table suddenly vibrated slightly, its encasing ancient magic seemingly feeling the resonance from Clare's intense emotions. The silver clasp automatically sprang open, and the lid of the locket flipped back. Inside that tiny hollow, hidden for decades, lay neither precious gems nor secret missives of power. Curled up amidst the worn velvet lining was a lock of an infant's fine hair. Under the flickering candlelight, that lock of hair radiated a pure, brilliant silver, the signature color of the Eldervale royal bloodline, identical to Clare's hair color when she was a child, before her adoptive mother had to use all sorts of roots to dye it a dull mud brown to conceal the truth. Cassian stared fixedly at the lock of silver hair. His throat choked, a broken growl of invisible pain echoing from the very bottom of his torn soul. The wall of ice he had painstakingly built over the past 27 years began to show deep, irreparable cracks. Chapter 3. The Oath. The atmosphere inside the interrogation room thickened, becoming so heavy that even the frankincense candles flickered as if about to go out. The lock of brilliant silver baby hair nestled in the old locket was like a cruel mockery aimed straight at the powerful monarch's ruthlessness and pride. The hands that had always firmly held the blood-stained sword of Alpha King Cassian now trembled slightly as he reached out his calloused fingers to touch those delicate strands of hair. His throat was bitterly constricted, a fierce wave of emotion surging in his chest, awakening the giant wolf that had remained submerged in extreme sorrow for 27 years. Lady Octavia stood beside him, her complexion turning from pale white to ashen gray. She gritted her teeth, her sharp eyes darting around as if searching for the perfect excuse to shatter the glaring truth. "Your Majesty, this is surely a highly elaborate trick." The royal advisor's tone remained deeply imposing. "This lock of hair could have been cut from any half-blood child out there. The enemies of the throne always know how to weave the sweetest lies to make you waver. Please, do not let weakness cloud the judgment of an alpha. Cassian slowly lifted his face. His gaze shifted from the silver lock to the resilient yet terrified face of the woman in the rough apron kneeling before him. The wall of ice in his eyes was quickly re-erected, masking every faint flicker of wavering that had just ignited. He was the king of Eldervale. He was not allowed to believe in miracles, for hope was the most cruel poison of all. You and this child are not going anywhere. The king's voice rang out, deep and carrying the weight of an absolute command. I give you 7 days. 7 days for the greatest mages of this castle to verify every drop of blood, every memory, and every strand of hair. Until the truth is exposed under the light of the silver moon, you will be under house arrest in this palace. Any attempt to flee will be charged as treason and executed on the spot. Clare's chest clenched, a suffocating feeling crashing down as she realized the crown of power was gradually turning into a cage, holding the lives of her and her daughter. She knew she could not fight the oppressive aura of an Alpha King, much less escape the layers of Eldervale's guards. But when her eyes met Octavia's undisguised hatred, her maternal instinct forced her to issue one final condition. If we must stay, I need an oath from you, Your Majesty. Clare held her head high, her clear voice devoid of any tremor. A pact established upon the honor of the throne. For the next 7 days, not a single cleric, not a single mage, and no noble lady is allowed to touch a drop of Ivy's blood. Absolutely no one is permitted to tear her away from my arms. The surrounding guards drew in sharp breaths of cold air. Never had a nameless commoner, let alone a wolfless one, dare to stand straight and demand a pact with their tyrannical king. Octavia opened her mouth to spit an insult, but a cold wave of Cassian's hand forced her to bite her lip and swallow the sharp words back down. Cassian looked deeply into Clare's tranquil eyes. There was a staggering stubbornness hidden within that petite frame. He nodded slowly, his voice echoing across the cold basalt walls. The ancient taboo of Eldervale is clearly carved on the sacred stones. It is absolutely forbidden to use the blood of children of royal lineage as a sacrifice to break any curse. Whosoever dares to use a child's blood for their own gain shall pay, with the downfall of their entire house. I accept your condition, wolfless one. No one shall be permitted to harm this child under my roof. Hearing that oath, Clare's rigid shoulders finally slumped slightly. She hugged Ivy tightly to her chest, closing her eyes to hold back the tears brimming at the corners of her eyes. She had temporarily secured her daughter's life, but she also knew perfectly well that the darkness within this palace was more dangerous than any pack of wild beasts in the deep forest. At the same time, in a dark, hidden corner beneath the dome of the ancient cathedral, where the moonlight could not seep through, Lady Octavia stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her face twisted with vicious calculations. Before her stood the head cleric draped in an ash-gray cloak, a man who had always been a highly effective tool for the dirty political schemes of the inner court. The king is letting foolish illusions of his deceased daughter blind him. Octavia hissed through her teeth, her black silk-gloved hands clenching together so tightly that her knuckles cracked. A thin-blooded maid and a demon-eyed bastard cannot possibly bear the bloodline of the throne. They are nothing but parasites trying to drain the decaying power of this castle. The head cleric bowed his head, whispering with great apprehension. But, my lady, the king has issued a decree. He swore that no one is allowed to touch the blood of the child named Ivy. Moreover, the newborn prince is gradually weakening. Conventional healing magic cannot hold out much longer. The ban of a mad king cannot salvage the survival of a kingdom. Octavia cut in coldly, her eyes flashing with a sinister light. If the prince dies, the council will immediately place my nephew on the throne. But I cannot let a filthy impostor stand in the way. Activate the magic arrays in the basement. Secretly prepare a backup ritual at once. If the king cannot shed his weakness, I will clean up that trash myself. As soon as the prince takes his last breath, or when I have the chance to separate that brat from her mother, her blood will be used as a sacrifice for the silver flame. The first night under house arrest in the royal guest quarters passed heavily and with a terrifying silence. The vast room was lavishly decorated with crimson silk drapes and a soft goose-feather bed, but to Clare, it was as cold as a crypt. The luxurious scent of precious essential oils could not dispel the foreboding feeling that constantly threatened to suffocate her heart. Clare tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Every cell in her body was strained to listen to the slightest sounds echoing from the corridor outside. Pent-up exhaustion eventually pulled her into a fitful slumber filled with terrifying illusions of roaring flames and broken screams. Suddenly, a freezing north wind rushed through the ajar window, bringing with it the ethereal mist of the night. The empty, chilling sensation from the other half of the large bed startled Clare awake. She groped the space beside her, her heart seemingly stopping when she realized the soft cotton blanket was completely flat. Ivy was gone. Utter panic drowning out all reason, Clare threw off the blanket and dashed out of bed. Her bare feet stepped on the thick carpet, yet she could still feel the bone-chilling cold. The oak door was ajar, revealing a dark, endless stretch of the royal corridor. Trembling, she stepped outside, her breathing ragged, her wide eyes trying to pierce through the long shadows cast by the pale moonlight. The stone wolf statues carved along both sides of the walls seemed to open their lifeless eyes to watch the desperate movements of a mother who had lost her child. She just kept running down the corridor, turning through silent, hidden corners until she neared the great hall connecting to the forbidden cathedral area. That place was flooded with a silvery light emitting from a giant stained-glass arched window. And there, amidst the vast and silent expanse, Clare saw Ivy's tiny figure. The 6-year-old child was wearing a white nightgown, walking barefoot on the icy marble floor. Ivy's half-gold, half-silver eyes were glazed over, unfocused on any point, clearly indicating she was deep in a strange state of sleepwalking. Her small body stood motionless before a massive oil portrait hung in the most prominent position on the stone wall. It was a portrait of the late Luna Catherine, the only wife Alpha King Cassian had ever loved. The queen with flowing silver hair and benevolent eyes was smiling gently, the crown on her head shining as brightly as the stars. Clare hurriedly rushed over, taking off her thin shawl with the intention of draping it over her daughter's shoulders. Just as she was about to call Ivy's name to wake her from this frightening bout of sleepwalking, a childish yet eerily echoing whisper rang out in the silent space. Ivy's tiny hand slowly reached out, her index finger pointing straight at the beautiful face of the woman in the antique portrait. The child's strange eyes suddenly flashed with a phantom-like glimmer, and her steady voice sliced through the night. "Mommy, Grandma is crying." Chapter 4. The servant beneath the gaze of the nobility. Morning light pierced through the giant stained-glass windows of the Eldervale Great Hall, casting resplendent streaks of light, shaped like ancient gods upon the marble floor. This morning's royal court was more crowded than usual. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes, musk, and silk, intermingling with a malicious curiosity spreading among the rows of nobles. At the very epicenter of that attention, Clare stood silently, one hand tightly gripping Ivy's trembling shoulder, the other unconsciously clutching the coarse fabric of the dress she wore. She looked like a lost, solitary lamb amidst a pack of starving wolves waiting to tear her apart. It was no ordinary outfit. Before the court session began, Lady Octavia had sent the head wet nurse to bring her a faded, stained, and ancient maid's dress, one usually reserved for those doing the lowliest dungeon cleaning chores. The royal advisor used the excuse that a thin-blooded one of unproven identity had no right to wear royal silk, and wearing these old rags was a way to remind her of her true place beneath this sacred dome. The contrast between Clare's shabby, coarse fabric and the jewel-encrusted gowns of the surrounding ladies made her a perfect laughingstock, an eyesore everyone wanted to point fingers at. Just look at her. That lowly appearance reeking of kitchen smoke and ash pollutes the very air of the great hall, a lady of the Fox clan whispered to the woman next to her, yet deliberately raising her voice loud enough for everyone around to hear. "I don't understand why the council allows a wolfless woman, dragging along a demon-eyed bastard, to stand on equal footing with us purebloods." Just looking into that child's hideous eyes, makes me feel as if my soul is cursed." Murmurs of agreement instantly erupted like a broken beehive. A few noble Lunas stepped forward, holding their heads high toward the throne where Alpha King Cassian sat brooding in the shadows of power. They bowed in unison with the most elaborate gestures, before one of them voiced a bitter petition. "Your Majesty, the presence of this woman and her child in the royal quarters is an insult to the gods. We cannot let a filthy impostor eat and sleep under the same roof as your only son. Please throw them out of the sanctuary, or at least lock them in the dungeons until the mages reach a final conclusion." Clare bit her lower lip hard to stop herself from blurting out hopeless protests. She knew any word she spoke now would merely serve as an excuse for them to punish her more severely. She tried to shrink back, using her petite body to shield Ivy from the razor-sharp gazes pinning the mother and daughter down. But Ivy was only a 6-year-old child. Sensing the extreme hostility and malice from the surrounding pack, she began to panic. Ivy's breathing grew rapid, her tiny hands clawing at her mother's coarse dress, tears of terror rolling down her pale cheeks. The negative emotions of a child with special abilities instantly sent an invisible tremor rippling across the hall. Right at the moment Ivy's fear reached its peak, the solid gold cradle placed behind the throne suddenly shook. The newborn prince, who had just fallen into a rare, peaceful sleep the night before, abruptly woke up and let out a fierce wail. The cry was heartbreaking, shrill, and intermittent, carrying the agony of a life being torn apart by an ancient curse. That cry struck the eardrums of everyone present, inciting pack instincts that threw the hall into chaos. The nobles began to step back in horror, while Lady Octavia smiled triumphantly, seizing the opportunity to step forward and deliver a decisive blow. "Do you see, Your Majesty?" Octavia's sharp voice echoed through the great hall. "It is the filth and evil of this fake witch that is draining the prince's vitality. As long as she stands here, the curse will never spare the throne. Bind her and throw that child to the cathedral for judgment." A squad of heavily armored royal guards immediately stepped forward at the advisor's wave, their razor-sharp spears pointed straight at Clare. Utter terror squeezed the mother's heart. Clare took a step back, instinctively spreading her thin arms to fully embrace Ivy, squeezing her eyes shut as she waited for the cold spearheads to pierce her flesh. She had no claws, no sharp fangs, no supernatural power to protect her child other than this small, mortal body. But in that very moment bordering on death, when the despair and terror in Clare's soul were pushed to their absolute limits, a bizarre transformation occurred. The everyday scent of mud and kitchen ash clinging to her suddenly vanished. Instead, from deep within the veins of the one deemed wolfless, a pure, chilling, yet sweet fragrance slowly spread, cutting through the hall's thick, musky air. It was the scent of white snow blanketing a desolate mountain peak, intertwined with the gentle aroma of laurel flowers blooming under the moonlight. This fragile scent carried an extraordinarily stubborn, primal power, enveloping the mother and daughter like an invisible shield. On the towering throne, Alpha King Cassian's body suddenly stiffened as if struck by lightning. His ice-colored eyes widened, his pupils dilating in unconcealed shock. The hand resting on the armrest gripped it so tightly that the black steel let out agonizing creaks. He recognized that scent. The unique fragrance that had once belonged to his ill-fated baby daughter, the scent he thought had been buried forever beneath the ashes of the rebellion night 27 years ago. The giant wolf slumbering within the monarch's mind suddenly snapped its eyes open, letting out an earth-shattering roar to reclaim its bloodline. The temperature in the great hall plummeted, as if a northern blizzard had just swept through the glass windows. Cassian shot up from the throne, unleashing the entirety of his most brutal alpha aura. That colossal, invisible power crashed down furiously upon every living creature in the room, so heavy it crushed all will to resist. The guards aiming their spears at Clare instantly collapsed to the stone floor, their knees smashing down hard enough to draw blood. The arrogant crowd of nobles who had just been hurling insults were now forced to kneel prostrate on the ground, their chests aching too much to breathe, their bodies trembling like dry leaves in a hurricane. Even Lady Octavia had to brace her hands against the floor, her face contorted in pain and terror. The vast hall sank into a deathly silence, leaving only the gradually softening cries of the newborn prince. Cassian slowly descended the steps of the throne, his tall silhouette casting a long shadow over the marble floor, radiating an indescribable fury. His dagger-sharp eyes swept over those groveling at his feet, his hoarse voice echoing slowly, but carrying the destructive force of a curse. Until the truth is exposed to the light, whoever insults her insults the throne of Eldervale. Whoever dares point a spearhead at this undecided bloodline, I will personally break their neck and execute their entire clan. The Wolf King's declaration was like a bloody law carved directly into the souls of everyone present. Clare looked up, her legs turning to jelly under the terrifying pressure weighing down on the space, but she still struggled to stand firm to hold Ivy. Cassian stopped right in front of her. The distance was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his massive frame, completely contrasting the coldness in his eyes. He looked down at her disheveled maid's dress, a fleeting trace of heartbreak passing through his icy eyes before he quickly extinguished it. The monarch unfastened the black, wolf fur-trimmed velvet cloak from his shoulders and swept it over Clare's trembling, thin shoulders, covering the humiliating stains of the lowly garment. That hasty motion caused the hem of the cloak to brush past, and in a fleeting, unintentional moment, Cassian's rough, scarred fingers grazed Clare's freezing back of the hand. The very second their skin touched, a strange electric current ran down both their spines, tearing through the fabric of reality. The magnificent scenery of the great hall before Clare's eyes suddenly shattered. Instead, a blazing red fire flared up, swallowing her vision. Billowing black smoke choked the air, the sound of wooden beams snapping echoed harshly alongside desperate screams. She saw herself, or rather, the memory of an infant, wrapped in a blood-stained blanket. Through the gaps in the fabric, she saw a woman with silver hair holding her tightly, running through a flaming corridor. And at the end of that corridor, the dark silhouette of a traitor blocked the door, holding a gleaming, blood-dripping dagger. Cassian also drew in a sharp breath of cold air, his body staggering back a step, his hand unconsciously clutching his left chest, as if someone had just stabbed right through it. He too saw that fire. He saw the collapse of the nursery tower on that fateful night he lost everything. The memory shared through that accidental touch shattered all defensive walls, leaving the powerful king and the lowly maid staring blankly at each other, breaths ragged, hearts beating wildly in their chests as they realized a terrifying truth slowly sprouting from the ashes of the past. Chapter 5. Princess Aurora's Room. A deathly silence still cloaked the great hall even after Alpha King Cassian had turned and walked away, leaving behind the trembling crowd of nobles kneeling on the marble floor. The biting cold from his aura still lingered in the air, but to Clare, the thing making her feel the most suffocated right now was not the power of a monarch, but the accidental touch carrying fiery images that had just flashed through her mind. She hugged Ivy tightly to her chest, hastily following the broad back wrapped in Cassian's pitch-black cloak. The wolf fur-trimmed velvet cloak he had just draped over her shoulders was incredibly heavy, carrying the ferocious scent of a northern blizzard, yet it created an invisible shield separating the mother and daughter from the hostile glares of the court's wolves. They walked through endless corridors, winding deep into the west tower of Eldervale Castle. This place was eerily deserted, completely devoid of armored guards or scurrying servants. Sunlight could not penetrate the narrow windows covered by layers of withered ivy vines. A sense of desolation and taboo permeated everywhere. Cassian stopped before a massive oak door, sealed with thick silver chains and magical runes that had faded over time. This was an absolute territory where no one was allowed to set foot for 27 years, a tomb of time preserving the throne's utmost agony. The monarch reached out his calloused hand to touch the silver lock. Needing no key, the royal blood surging through his veins instantly produced a long, deep resonance. The silver chains automatically loosened and slid onto the stone floor. The heavy oak door creaked open, grinding against thick layers of temporal dust, exposing a space submerged in the dim light of tranquility. Clare followed him inside, her heart pounding heavily in her chest. The vast room was lavishly decorated with soft silks in tones of silver and blue. Though tinted by time, it still retained its exquisite extravagance. In the center of the room was a large cradle forged from white cedar, draped in a delicate sheer canopy. Intricately carved toys, sheepskin-bound fairy tale books, all lay exactly in their places, as if their little owner had only just left yesterday. Cassian's sorrow was so dense it materialized into a physical entity, filling every single inch of the room, making Clare feel as if her chest was being crushed. Ivy slipped from her mother's arms, her half-gold, half-silver eyes gleaming with pure curiosity, completely unaffected by the tragic pressure enveloping the surroundings. The 6-year-old child walked barefoot on the snowy white wolf fur rug, wandering around the room with an eerily uncanny familiarity. She stopped before a marble vanity table, where a small silver box carved with winding crescent moon sat. Ivy's tiny hands touched the box, trying to open it, but the latch seemed tightly sealed by some magic, remaining entirely unyielding. "Mommy, help me open it." Ivy turned around, holding the silver box out toward Clare with an innocent, hopeful face. Clare hesitantly stepped forward, her eyes stealing a glance at Cassian's sturdy yet burdened back as he stood silently by the window. She reached out her freezing hands to touch the tarnished metal. The exact moment her skin made contact with the box's surface, a faint warmth suddenly coursed along her fingers. The silver latch automatically released, and the hinges slowly popped open with the dry, grating sound of long-unused metal. Inside the box was a delicate musical mechanism made of tiny solid gold gears. As the first gear began to turn, a melodic, slow, and sorrowful tune chimed out, shattering the 27-year silence of the sealed room. Clare's pupils dilated, her breath catching in her throat. Her entire body stiffened as if she had just been drenched in freezing water. She knew this melody. It was not a foreign sound, but the lullaby that constantly haunted her terrifying childhood nightmares, whenever she dreamed of a blazing sea of fire and the silhouette of a desperately screaming woman. Her adoptive mother had sworn it was just the crazy delusions of a sickly orphan, but now, in the most cruel way possible, that sound was ringing out, real and true, right in the middle of the dead princess's room. The truth was like a razor-sharp blade slowly slicing open the veil of lies she had believed her entire life. The crystal-clear chime of the music box wove into every hidden corner of the room. Cassian abruptly turned around, his breathing ragged, his chest heaving violently. His eyes were glued to the music box resting neatly in Clare's thin hands. It was an item Luna Catherine had personally enchanted with her blood, a device that could only be activated by those bearing the pure blood of the throne. For all these years, Cassian had tried touching it countless times, but it always refused to open before the aura of an alpha, loyally waiting only for the warmth of its true master's lifeblood. Under the silvery light piercing through the window frame, Clare's silhouette blurred in the Wolf King's sorrow-filled eyes. She stood there, draped in his black fur-trimmed cloak, her face pale with shock, yet the scent of snow and laurel flowers was radiating stronger than ever, blanketing the space with an agonizing familiarity. The wall of ice Cassian had painstakingly built to protect his shattered heart finally and utterly collapsed. Eldervale's greatest monarch stepped forward with staggering steps, losing all his usual majestic demeanor. He stopped in front of Clare, his battle-scarred hands trembling slightly as he reached out, seemingly wanting to touch her cheek, but terrified that this was merely an empty illusion that would shatter if he applied force. From the absolute depths of a heart burdened with ultimate agony, a hoarse, weak, and broken call slipped from the dry lips of a father who had lost his child. Aurora? That foreign name struck Clare's mind like a clap of thunder. The sheer terror of facing an overwhelmingly immense truth made her instincts scream at her to run. She took a step back, dodging the king's fragile touch, accidentally retreating deep into the dark corner of the room. The hand clutching the music box clumsily tightened, while her frail back bumped against the freezing surface of something incredibly solid. It was a massive, solid silver mirror that reached the ceiling, placed in a hidden corner of the room. The mirror surface was originally tarnished and covered in dust, but the moment the warmth from Clare's body transferred to the ancient metal, the mirror suddenly emitted an eerie, swirling, fog-like light. Clare turned her head, and the reflection in the mirror made her heart feel as if it had stopped. Instead of reflecting the room's current silent state, a vivid and horrifying scene appeared on the glass. She saw roaring red flames devouring the stone walls. She saw Luna Catherine with tangled silver hair, her face smeared with ash and fresh blood, clutching a small bundled blanket as she ran down a collapsing corridor. The queen panted, her eyes brimming with despair as she lunged toward the door leading to the final escape route. That door slowly opened. The silhouette of a woman in a black cloak stood there, holding out her hand like a savior amidst the sea of fire. Luna Catherine sobbed, about to hand the baby over to the woman, but at that exact moment, the figure standing outside the door gave a cold smile, ruthlessly withdrew her hand, and stepped aside, making way for silver-masked assassins wielding daggers to advance. The light of the blazing fire flared up, clearly illuminating the face of the traitor who had just opened the door for death. Even though 27 years had passed, and though that face was somewhat younger, Clare instantly recognized those wicked eyes and that proudly curled lip. The one who had betrayed the throne, the one who had pushed the great queen of Eldervale to her death, was none other than Lady Octavia Marrow. Chapter 6. The Liars. The illusion in the silver mirror faded and vanished, leaving Clare rooted in the middle of the freezing room. Her heart pounded erratically, as if it wanted to tear through her chest. Lady Octavia's cruel face and the blazing red fire from the past were still deeply etched in her mind, so clear and real that she could almost smell the acrid scent of burning wood and fresh blood. The truth seemed to be lurking right beneath the marble floors of Eldervale Castle, waiting to drag her down into a bottomless abyss. Clare unconsciously stepped back, holding tightly to a sleepily rubbing her eyes ivy, carefully avoiding Alpha King Cassian's shattered gaze. He still stood there, immersed in the darkness of utterly tragic memories, completely unaware of the horrifying reflection she had just witnessed. Returning to the pseudo-prison room meant for royal guests, Clare locked the door tightly, her trembling body sliding down the freezing wall until she hit the carpeted floor. She couldn't trust anyone in this palace. If Octavia was truly the traitor from years ago, then her possessing royal blood was no longer a miracle of reunion, but a preordained death sentence. Just as Clare was drowning in her chaotic thoughts, a dull knock echoed on the door, followed by a deep, cautious voice from the corridor. "Lady Clare, it is me, Bane Ardent. Please open the door. I brought something you need to see." Clare hesitated for a second before deciding to turn the lock. Standing outside was the young wolf knight in silver armor gleaming under the torchlight, his amber eyes carrying a quiet resolve. Ever since she was humiliated by the mob of nobles in the Great Hall, Bane was the only one who dared to step up and shield her before the king's oppressive aura descended. The scent of pine needles and leather radiating from him offered a sense of safety, but he carefully maintained a respectful distance, not letting his pack instincts encroach upon the vigilance of a mother holding her child. Bane slipped into the room, carefully shutting the door tight before placing an old, yellowed sheepskin parchment on the oak table. "I sneaked into the dungeon archives beneath the sanctuary," he whispered, his eyes skimming over Clare's pale face. "After what happened this morning, I knew I couldn't delay any longer. This is the confession and execution record from the night the infant tower burned. My father was the captain of the guard at the gate that night. He was executed on charges of colluding with rebels, leaving the emergency exit open, which led to the queen and princess losing their lives." Clare held her breath and stepped forward, her fingers tracing the lines written in faded black ink. She saw the signature of the guard named Arden stamped with bright red wax, a bloody seal that determined the fate of an entire clan. "But this signature is forged." Bane clenched his fists, his knuckles popping with the agonizing suppression of his rage. "My father was left-handed. His handwriting always had a very distinct backward slant. The person who wrote this confession intentionally mimicked it, but the pressure of the pen nib completely belonged to a right-handed person. Furthermore, the witnesses in this document, All of them died in mysterious accidents just months after that horrific night. There is no one left alive to prove my father's innocence, or to tell the truth about who really opened that door. The Wolf Knight's words were like a perfect puzzle piece fitting into the image in the silver mirror. Clare felt a chill run down her spine. Her eyes darkened. The traitor wasn't your father. I saw her, the one who opened the door for the assassins, the one who orchestrated this entire tragedy to usurp the throne, was Lady Octavia. Bane's pupils constricted, his breathing suddenly growing heavy. Despite having long held suspicions, hearing the woman carrying the scent of the late princess confirm it shattered the knight's worldview. He nodded, his eyes brimming with determination. I will bring this record before the council. If you are truly Princess Aurora, this truth will overturn all the wrongful verdicts. Bane bowed and hastily left, taking with him the fragile hope of overthrowing a decades-old lie. Left alone in the room, Clare slowly took off the king's black fur-lined cloak, carefully placing it over the back of a chair. She reached behind her shoulder, her slender fingers unconsciously touching a patch of rough, burning skin. Throughout her childhood, her adoptive mother had always forced her to apply a bitter, poisonous root ointment to this spot, claiming it was a way to hide an unlucky birthmark that could attract evil spirits. That layer of ointment left her skin constantly peeling, red, swollen, and in pain. But ever since she was detained in the palace, with no toxic layer covering it, that patch of skin had begun to soothe, the rough scabs peeling off in small flakes. Clare stepped in front of the bronze mirror in the corner of the room, slowly pulling down the collar of her old maid's dress over her slender shoulder. Under the flickering candlelight, the skin behind her left shoulder blade revealed a mark so radiant it was unmistakable. It was no unlucky birthmark, but a perfect crescent moon, glowing with a silver hue as if carved from starlight. The moon goddess mark, the most sacred symbol that only appeared on the bodies of pure-blooded heiresses of the Eldervale dynasty. She was always hiding me, Clare whispered, hot tears rolling down her cheeks. The poor adoptive mother at the edge of the forest wasn't punishing her with that toxic root. She was using every means to protect her from the prying eyes of royal lackeys. At that exact moment, the unlocked door was abruptly pushed open. The freezing chill of the blizzard swept in, carrying the immense oppressive aura of a monarch. Alpha King Cassian strode into the room, as if his internal turmoil and the familiar scent had urged him here, regardless of protocol. However, the king's steady footsteps suddenly froze in the middle of the room. The king's eyes were glued to Clare's bare back reflected in the mirror. More precisely, glued to the silver crescent moon glowing behind her shoulder blade. The air seemed to be sucked out of the room. The proud walls of the most powerful Alpha King of the North completely collapsed. Cassian stumbled forward, his chest heaving violently, his breathing raspy like a gravely wounded beast. The hands that had severed the heads of countless enemies now trembled as they reached out in midair, trying to suppress the yearning to touch the sacred mark he thought had forever turned to ash. His ice-colored eyes brimmed with tears, his cruelty and majesty replaced by the agonizing pain of a father who had just found a lost piece of his soul. The mark, the moon goddess mark. Cassian spoke in a hoarse voice, every word shattering in his throat. He dropped to one knee on the carpet, looking up at her with eyes silently begging for unseen forgiveness. For all these years, you were right under this roof, right under my gaze, and I let you live like a lowly servant. Clare turned around, her hand clutching the collar of her dress, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked at the great king collapsing at her feet, feeling the bond of blood screaming in her veins. She wanted to open her mouth to call him, to tell him about the conspiracy of the one who had pushed their family into tragedy. But before a sound could escape her lips, a flurry of hurried footsteps rang out, along with the clatter of clashing weapons out in the corridor. The door was kicked open with brutal force. Lady Octavia barged in, her arrogant face haughty, followed by dozens of armored guards and the head priest holding a silver staff carved with purging runes. The cunning woman's venomous gaze swept over the crescent moon on Clare's shoulder and stopped at the kneeling figure of the king. Without giving Cassian a chance to speak up in defense, Octavia loudly declared before everyone present, her tone filled with threat and triumph. "Seize her. This vile maid is a dark witch. She used dark magic to create an illusion of the royal birthmark and a fake scent to manipulate the mind of the grieving king. The council has issued a judgment. The impostor of the royal bloodline must be brought to the stake before her magic completely destroys the kingdom." Chapter 7. The True or Fake Princess. The dawn sky of Eldervale was covered in layers of gray clouds, rolling together like a giant funeral veil. The vast courtyard in front of the sanctuary, which had once witnessed the most glorious moments of the dynasty, was now thick with the scent of burning sage and the wrath of the crowd. Thousands of citizens and nobles had gathered early, crowding together under the pale light of still-burning torches. In the center of the courtyard, a white marble altar was erected, upon which sat a sacred chalice cast from pure silver, radiating a cold light. Clare was roughly escorted up the stone steps by 2 armored guards. Her old maid's dress fluttered in the biting wind, but her spine remained straight, her determined eyes fixed on her little daughter being held tightly below the altar's steps. Lady Octavia stood beside the altar, the corners of her lips slightly curled into a cruel smile perfectly concealed beneath the guise of protecting the throne. The night before, right after bursting into the room and seeing the birthmark on Clare's shoulder, she had immediately exploited the panic and the Alpha King's sudden heart attack to take control of the situation. Octavia spread rumors throughout the castle that a witch had used dark arts to create the illusion of the moon goddess mark to bewitch the king, plotting to seize the regency. The noble crowd, who always despised those with diluted blood, immediately sided with her. They demanded a public bloodline test before the people to expose the impostor, and if she failed, the flames from the stake would be the end of the one who dared to blaspheme the royal family. On the high platform opposite, Alpha King Cassian sat slumped on a temporary throne, his face as pale as a lifeless stone statue. The monarch's large hands gripped the armrests so tightly his knuckles bled, yet he could not stand up to walk toward the daughter he had just found. The moment he saw the moon goddess mark and acknowledged Aurora's blood in his mind, the cruel curse rooted in the throne for 27 years had been triggered. It recognized the existence of an heir with royal blood whose wolf instinct was sealed. The curse transformed into thousands of invisible blades, continuously slashing at Cassian's heart and chest every time he tried to speak up to acknowledge Clare before the crowd. His immense alpha aura was now swallowed by that dark magic, turning the mighty king into a helpless, agonizing father struggling against the fury from the darkness. "Let the moon goddess judge the truth." The head priest's echoing voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. He stepped forward, carrying a silver dagger engraved with ancient holy hymns. "If this woman carries the pure royal blood of Princess Aurora, the sacred silver chalice will embrace her life force and shine with a radiant halo. But if this is just a despicable trick of the devil, the gods will reject this filthy blood." Clare took a deep breath, trying to dispel the chill gnawing at every inch of her flesh. She looked down at the stone steps, where Ivy was struggling in the arms of the wet nurse, her face streaked with tears. She then looked up at Knight Baynardant, who was disarmed and pinned to the ground by 4 guards for trying to intervene. All hope now relied entirely on herself, on the blood flowing in her veins that she had only vaguely begun to realize. She reached out her slender hand, accepting the dagger from the priest. The freezing blade sliced across her palm, cutting a deep gash. Fresh blood oozed out, dripping crimson drops into the waiting belly of the silver chalice. The entire square held its breath. The eyes of thousands were glued to the altar. Clare also clenched her fist, her heart pounding wildly in her chest, waiting for the gentle silver light of a miracle to envelop the space. She waited for the truth to free mother and daughter from this dark cage, restoring the honor and roots that had been stripped from her. But the miracle did not happen. As soon as Clare's drops of blood touched the bottom of the chalice, the shiny metal surface suddenly bubbled, hissing horrifically as if doused in highly toxic acid. The bright red liquid turned thick and black in the blink of an eye, emitting plumes of gray smoke that reeked of rotting roots. By some evil power, black cracks began to spread from the bottom of the chalice, running along the carved motifs until it burst open. The harsh sound of cracking metal rang out. The 200-year-old sacred chalice shattered into dozens of pieces, crashing loudly onto the marble floor before the sheer horror of everyone present. Clare took a step back, all color draining from her face. Her lips trembled, unable to utter a word. She had no idea that, since the night before, Octavia had secretly used ancient forbidden magic to taint the silver chalice. She had planted a bloodline nullifying spell, making the sacred metal react violently to the wolf seal within Clare's body, turning a holy ritual into a deadly dark magic performance. "Look, that dark blood has destroyed the holy relic," a voice from the noble's seat screamed, tearing through the silence. "She is a witch, an impostor carrying the seed of the devil. Eliminate her. Don't let her spread the curse to the throne." The crowd, like a lit powder keg, instantly exploded into a frenzy of rage. Boos and curses rang out endlessly. They began picking up cobblestones and pieces of broken wood at their feet and hurling them straight at the altar platform. A sharp-edged stone tore through the wind and struck Clare's forehead hard, tearing her skin. Warm, fresh blood streamed down her pale cheek, blurring her vision. The physical pain was nothing compared to the horrifying collapse in her soul. The newly kindled hope was crushed beneath the heels of lies and violence. She was no longer an anonymous maid, but had become the enemy of the entire kingdom. Amidst the rain of objects showering down on the altar, Clare forgot about her wound. She lunged straight down the stone steps, using her frail body to shield Ivy, who was wailing in panic. The cold stones relentlessly pelted her back and shoulders, but the mother only curled up, gritting her teeth and enduring it, her arms wrapping tightly around her little daughter, as if wanting to use her last breath to hold onto a faint trace of warmth. On the high platform, Cassian let out a roar of agony that tore his throat. He tried to reach out, wanting to scream to all of Eldervale that the woman enduring such humiliation was his last drop of blood. But just as the monarch's lips mumbled the name, Aurora, the curse on the throne instantly backfired. A brain-piercing pain shot straight through his chest, and he coughed up a mouthful of crimson blood. Cassian completely collapsed onto the armrest, his ice-colored eyes filled with helplessness and despair as he was forced to watch his daughter being trampled on without being able to reach out and protect her. "Take her to the stake. Take that child away. We cannot let such trash defile the sanctuary any longer," Octavia ordered, a triumphant smile fully blooming on her lips. The guards immediately rushed forward, violently dragging Clare and Ivy apart despite the mother's desperate resistance. But the very moment the guard's rough hand touched Ivy's small shoulder, an event beyond the imagination of the greatest mages occurred. Ivy stopped crying. The 6-year-old child's panic was abruptly replaced by a magnificent and terrifying ancient energy. The little girl tilted her tear-stained face up to the gray sky. A piercing scream, not a child's cry, but the echoing resonance of departed royal souls, tore through the violent atmosphere. Ivy's half-gold, half-silver eyes suddenly glowed brilliantly, radiating a pure magical aura that swept across the entire sacred square. The marble ground shook violently, as if an earthquake had just erupted from the deep. The panicked crowd tumbled. Their screams and curses were instantly silenced by sheer terror. Along the two edges of the square, 12 giant stone statues depicting the ancient kings of Eldervale, which had stood motionless for centuries, suddenly emitted chilling sounds of friction. The dust of time billowed up. Under the shattered gaze of Lady Octavia and the entire Eldervale nobility, those magnificent stone statues moved in unison. They slowly bent their heavy stone knees, lowering their massive swords to the ground. And then, the 12 ancient kings of the throne simultaneously knelt on one knee, bowing reverently toward the bleeding woman in the maid's dress lying in the center of the courtyard. The true blood had spoken to protect its master, crushing all human lies. Chapter 8. The Child Who Should Not Have Survived. The sanctuary square sank into a silence, so profound that one could hear the first snowflakes shattering as they touched the marble floor. 12 colossal statues of the ancient kings, forged from volcanic rock and thought to be forever motionless, were now kneeling prostrate at the feet of a woman wearing a torn and blood-stained maid's dress. This magnificent and anomalous sight shattered all the arrogant prejudices of the Eldervale nobility. Their jaws dropped, weapons and boulders slipping from their hands to the ground. No dark magic, no insidious curse could bend the will of the 12 ancient kings to force them to bow, except for the purest royal bloodline screaming to reclaim its rightful place. Standing beside the altar, Lady Octavia's face distorted in a spasm of fury and panic. She stepped back, her velvet-clad shoes trampling upon the shards of the sacred silver chalice that had just been destroyed by her own forbidden magic. All her perfect calculations, all her efforts to frame Clare as a fake witch, evaporated before the witness of the stone statues. But someone who had spent her entire life manipulating power like Octavia would absolutely not accept defeat. The royal advisor's sharp, cold eyes swept toward the high dais, where Alpha King Cassian had collapsed on the temporary throne. The king was suffering a cruel punishment from the very throne he ruled. The venomous curse that had rained down upon the royal bloodline for the past 27 years was triggered at its most ferocious level. It sensed the presence of a legitimate heir who inhabited the body of an incompetent, wolfless creature. Every time Cassian wanted to speak up to protect Clare, every time he wanted to scream to the world that she was his daughter, the dark magic morphed into invisible claws tearing at his chest. Fresh blood seeped from the corner of the valiant monarch's lips. His breathing was ragged, the colossal aura of an alpha crushed by the throne itself, turning him into a helpless prisoner on his own territory. Realizing the king's ultimate weakening, Octavia let out a harsh burst of laughter, the sound as cold and sharp as broken glass slicing through the tense air. "Are you terrified? Are you going to kneel before a wolfless woman just because these lifeless rocks moved?" Octavia's voice, amplified by magic, echoed across the domed courtyard. She pointed straight at Clare's pale face, discarding every layer of her fake loyal mask to expose her primal cruelty. "Yes, she bears Cassian's blood. She is Princess Aurora, whom you all thought burned to death in the night of the rebellion. But look closely, what is she? A despicable thin blood, a useless cripple who cannot shift, cannot connect with the kingdom." The noble crowd erupted in gasps of horror. The truth was ripped open so abruptly that no one had time to react. Clare clutched her left chest, her heart beating so wildly and rapidly that her chest ached. She stared at the enemy who had ruined her life, a feeling of indignation and choked resentment rising like a violent wave. "Years ago, your piece of trash Luna Catherine did not die immediately in the fire." Octavia frantically exposed her own crimes, her eyes rolling back in a sickeningly triumphant glare. "That woman used the final forbidden magic of her life to seal all the wolf instincts of this infant, turning her into an ordinary human to blind me. But I found her. I swapped the remains of another stillborn child into the ashes, then threw your noble princess to a lowly peasant family at the edge of the forest. I wanted her to live a humiliating, filthy life, trampled under the boots of those she was meant to rule. I kept her alive right in this palace, just to watch the despair of the Veyr bloodline." Every word Octavia spoke was like a dagger stabbing straight into Cassian's bleeding heart. He let out a roar of agony, struggling to push himself up, but the curse rooted in the throne instantly twisted his bones, forcing the mighty king to bow his head to the cold stone floor. Nightbane Ardent shoved aside the guards restraining him, drawing the silver sword at his waist and lunging forward, but was immediately blocked by a wall of dark magic erected by the rebel clerics. "But I underestimated Catherine's forbidden magic." Octavia narrowed her eyes, her twisted smile shifting toward the little girl Ivy, who was trembling and clinging tightly to her mother. This demon-eyed child, the ability to hear the call of the deceased bloodline she possesses, is the remnant of the forbidden magic left by her grandmother. She is the final puzzle piece of the throne's curse. If her mother is the true princess, then her blood is perfectly qualified to serve as a sacrifice. The moment her order dropped, dark figures in black cleric robes rushed forward in unison from the hidden corners of the square. Clare instantly understood their vicious intent. She braced her hands against the stone floor, hastily grabbing Ivy and backing away. But the small body of a wolfless woman, already covered in wounds from the recent hail of stones, was completely incapable of resisting the strength of these brutal men. A powerful blast of magic sent Clare flying, her back slamming into the stone pedestal of the ancient king statue. Her vision darkened, her chest suffocating from the horrific impact. "Mommy! Mommy!" Ivy's heart-wrenching scream shattered in the air. Clare struggled to open one swollen eye, watching in horror as her daughter was grabbed by the clerics by her tiny arms, dragged across the ground toward the heavy gates of the Forbidden Cathedral. That was where the newborn prince's cradle lay, and the only place with a seal strong enough to perform the blood sacrifice ritual. "Bring that brat inside. Begin the transference ritual," Octavia ordered, following the screaming child. "Just use her blood to transfer the curse from the prince to that crippled princess. The throne will belong to my nephew, and the Veyr bloodline will be forever erased from the history of Eldervale." The giant oak doors of the cathedral slammed shut, locked tight by layers of pitch-black magical chains, completely severing the space inside from the outside. Ivy's wailing was swallowed by the darkness, leaving Clare gasping for breath amidst a pool of her own blood. The noble crowd seemed paralyzed by Octavia's audacity and power. No one dared to step forward. Cassian remained slumped on the throne, his tear-filled eyes staring blankly at the closed doors, his absolute helplessness turning into choked sobs from deep within the king's throat. Clare felt her entire body turn ice-cold, her life force seemingly draining slowly from her body. Brain-piercing pains tore through every cell, but Ivy's cry of "Mommy" still echoed in her mind, clearer and more painful than any physical wound. The ancient oath echoed in the space. "Do not use the blood of royal children to break the curse, or the entire kingdom will pay the price." No mage, no mighty Alpha could step through the cathedral doors right now without having their soul incinerated by the backlash flames. But she was not a mage, nor was she a great wolf. She was just a mother. She was a woman bearing royal blood, but sealed away from all primal power. That truth suddenly flashed in Clare's mind like a brilliant halo amidst the dark night. The curse only controlled the wolf bloodline. It rejected magic, it fought against pack authority. But it could not touch the absolutely pure and ordinary humanity of a mortal being. The flaw that had caused her to be humiliated her entire life, the wolflessness that had turned her into a lowly maid, was now the very key to bypassing the taboo laws of the throne. Clare bit her teeth until they bled, pressing her scraped hands against the freezing stone floor. Every joint cracked as she mustered all her remaining strength to stand up straight. Bright red blood dripped from her forehead down to her chin, soaking the torn collar of her dress, but her strangely colored eyes blazed with an unyielding fire that made the entire crowd step back with bated breath. She did not look at Bane frantically trying to break the barrier, nor did she look at the powerful father collapsed in agony. Leaving all belated protection behind, Clare dragged her heavy yet resolute footsteps toward the cathedral. A thin hand, scarred from hard labor, reached out and placed itself upon the oak surface, radiating the pitch-black miasma of forbidden magic. She was ready to break all the rules of the throne, ready to use her own mortal blood to confront the most brutal flames, as long as she could snatch her little daughter back from the hands of death. No curse, no traitor could stop the footsteps of a mother walking into the realm of death. Chapter 9. The Servant Who Broke the Throne's Laws. The massive oak doors of the Forbidden Cathedral let out a mournful shriek as Clare's thin, bloody hands touched the tarnished metal. A pitch-black miasma, thick as tar, immediately surged from the cracks, wrapping around her wrists like a nest of venomous snakes wanting to bite the intruder to pieces. The greatest mages or the most powerful alphas of Eldervale would have their souls incinerated by these dark flames if they intentionally crossed the forbidden boundary. However, a strange thing happened. The frantic miasma extended its dark tentacles to invade Clare's body, desperately searching for a wolf instinct, searching for a beastly soul to devour and manipulate, but it completely failed. Inside that fragile body, there was no wolf whatsoever. The defect that had once caused her to be despised, trampled upon, and stripped of her dignity for 27 years, now created a zone of absolute silence. The ancient curse designed to control the wolf bloodline was completely blind before a mortal. The dark miasma slid off her skin like water pouring over a smooth stone slab, leaving no harm other than a bone-chilling cold. Taking advantage of the moment the defensive magic was neutralized, Clare threw her entire body weight forward, gritting her teeth and pushing hard against the heavy doors. The space inside the cathedral revealed a gruesome scene to her eyes. Under the soaring vaulted ceiling carved with images of the gods, dozens of black candles were emitting the foul stench of rotting flesh and burning sage. Surrounding the solid gold cradle of the newborn prince, 7 clerics in ash-gray cloaks were kneeling, continuously muttering barbaric incantations. At the center of the magic array stood Lady Octavia, her black silk-gloved hand tightly gripping a silver dagger engraved with forbidden runes. At her feet, on a cold stone slab, Ivy was tightly bound by magical chains, the child's half-gold, half-silver eyes overflowing with sheer terror, her mouth gagged, unable to cry out for help. Clare's sudden appearance brought the chanting in the cathedral to a halt. Octavia whipped her head around, her eyes rolling back in unbelievable horror mixed with fury. "How could you step in here?" The backlash barrier should have incinerated the soul of anyone bearing Veyr blood who dared to interfere with the ritual. The royal advisor hissed, swinging her arm to command a colossal invisible pressure crashing straight toward the woman in the torn maid's dress. But that pressure only fluttered Clare's mud-stained locks of hair. She took firm, steady steps toward the altar, her calm, yet vengeance-fueled eyes staring straight at the enemy who had stolen her biological mother's life. "Because your curse only knows how to seek out proud wolves," Clare spoke, her clear and composed tone echoing amidst the sacred stone walls, shattering the macabre atmosphere. "You sealed my wolf instincts. You turned me into a despicable thin blood just as you wanted. And it is that very despicability that is stripping away your strongest weapon." Octavia ground her teeth tightly, her face twisted in madness. She understood that she could not use pack aura to suppress a wolfless one. "Do you think your mediocrity can fight against death? If the barrier won't kill you, I will personally stab your heart to pieces, you useless trash." She raised the dagger high, preparing to lunge toward Clare. But Clare did not wait for any knight to come to her rescue, nor did she flinch before the sharp blade. From the pocket of her apron, she pulled out the old silver bracelet, the only keepsake carrying Luna Catherine's warmth. Her bleeding hand tightly grasped the metal surface carved with crescent moons. The moment Princess Aurora's blood merged with the protective blood spell imbued into the bracelet by her mother 27 years ago, a blinding silvery light exploded, knocking the dagger out of Octavia's hand. The advisor staggered back, clutching her wrist that was burned by the pure energy. Clare rushed to the stone slab, using sheer physical strength to untie the ribbon gagging Ivy and pulled the child tightly into her chest. Feeling her mother's warmth, the magical chains on the little girl gradually cracked and then crumbled, for they could not imprison a soul enveloped by unconditional love. "Mommy," Ivy sobbed, her tiny arms wrapping tightly around Clare's neck. "It's okay, my love, I'm here," she whispered, gently kissing her daughter's frayed hair. Then, Clare picked Ivy up, stepping toward the solid gold cradle where the newborn prince was weakly drawing his final breaths, the baby's skin already turning the ashen gray of death. "Stop her! You useless fools, kill her now!" Octavia screamed, commanding the dark clerics. The minions immediately extended their twisted, dark magic hands toward the mother and daughter. But Clare had prepared for this moment. She did not use offensive magic, but began to sing. The melodic, sorrowful, and sacred tune from the music box in the old room rang out from her chapped lips. It was Luna Catherine's lullaby, a lullaby possessing the power to comfort the most agonized souls. That crystal-clear sound swelled within the cathedral, weaving into every dark corner, dispelling the barbaric incantations. The clerics covered their ears, collapsing to the stone floor, writhing in agony as the darkness within their bodies was purged by the pure sound. Still holding Ivy with one arm, Clare reached out her hand that had been slashed by the sacred chalice, dripping with fresh blood. Without hesitation, she gently placed that blood-soaked palm upon the freezing forehead of the newborn prince. "The throne needs no more children's blood," Clare declared, each word carrying the weight of a queen re-establishing order for her kingdom. The blood flowing from the veins of a wolfless one, carrying no malicious ambition, containing no thirst for power, and untainted by the toxic pride of the pack, began to merge with the dark curse rooted in the newborn's body. The curse, which inherently always tore at those bearing the greatest power, was now completely baffled by the tolerance and purity of a mortal life. Like a ferocious storm crashing into a silent vacuum, the dark magic was drained, crumbling from the inside out. A deep, muted explosion resonated, shaking the very stone foundation of Eldervale Castle. The thick atmosphere inside the cathedral suddenly cleared. The black candles extinguished simultaneously, replaced by the brilliant light of the morning sun piercing through the giant stained-glass windows, shining directly onto the solid gold cradle. The newborn prince snapped his eyes open. For the first time since birth, the child let out a loud, echoing, and vibrant cry, a powerful sound proving that the Veyr family's curse had been completely broken. The wave of backlash from the destruction of the forbidden magic spread at a terrifying speed. Unlike the gentle, soothing Clare brought to the prince, the backlash flames sought out the dark source that had created it. The evil energy slammed straight into Lady Octavia's body, throwing her against a marble pillar. The royal advisor's entire facade of nobility and arrogance collapsed. Her skin became wrinkled, ashen gray, covered in bleeding, pitch-black runes, the brutal markings of one who had sold her soul to maintain a curse. The truth about the crime spanning 27 years was now clearly manifested upon the perpetrator's own body. Outside the oak doors that had been blasted wide open by the shockwave, the entire crowd of nobles and commoners stood rooted in choked silence. They saw everything. They saw the woman in the mud and blood-stained maid's dress, standing backlit before the sacred altar, one arm holding her abandoned child, the other shielding the final life of the royal family. She was greater and more holy than any statue of a god ever erected in Eldervale. From the middle of the parting crowd, Alpha King Cassian stepped forward. The curse binding the throne had dissipated, returning unparalleled power and primal majesty to the monarch. Yet his every step into the cathedral was incredibly slow and trembling. The king's ice-colored eyes, filled with tears, swept past the ruins of the dark array, past the ruined body of the traitor, and stopped at the small, resilient figure of the woman carrying the scent of first snow. Cassian did not use his alpha aura, nor did he carry the posture of a ruler. He walked up to Clare, his broad shoulders heavy with the regrets and agony accumulated over half a lifetime. Before the astonished eyes of the entire kingdom, the proudest king of the north slowly bent his knees onto the shattered marble floor, lowered his black steel crown, and looked up at her with all the humility and love of a father. "I'm sorry for making you wait so long," his hoarse voice echoed across the vast space, carrying a broken tremble. "My daughter." Chapter 10. The crown is no longer a cage. A profound silence enveloped the vast expanse of the cathedral, so sacred and deep that even the dust motes suspended in the morning rays seemed to cease their floating. The call, "my daughter," from the proudest king of the north shattered against the marble walls, yet it possessed enough power to heal a wound that had bled relentlessly for 27 years in the kingdom of Eldervale. Under the clear light pouring down from the giant stained-glass dome, the silhouette of the powerful Alpha King kneeling before a blood-stained servant brought no sense of humiliation or cowardice. On the contrary, it was a moment where truth and primal love defeated the most cruel curse the darkness had ever woven. Clare stood frozen, her chapped lips trembling slightly. Her thin hands, heavily scarred from hard labor, slowly loosened their tight grip around Ivy. She took a half-step forward, reaching out her still blood-stained fingers to touch Cassian's broad shoulders, which were shaking with every choked sob. The very moment their skin touched, the scent of first snow and laurel flowers from her body gently intertwined with the king's northern blizzard fragrance. Unlike the previous accidental touches, no fiery memories or chest-tearing pains rushed in. The curse binding the throne had vanished forever. The heavily scarred giant wolf within the monarch's mind gently nuzzled into that familiar scent, finding the peace it thought it had lost for eternity. Cassian slowly stood up straight. With the darkness of the forbidden magic no longer weighing down his royal bloodline, his primal alpha aura erupted once more, powerful, immense, but no longer carrying a frantic cruelty. He turned his back to his daughter, his ice-colored eyes as sharp as a newly honed sword aimed straight at the shattered altar, where Lady Octavia lay writhing amidst pools of pitch-black blood. The once powerful royal advisor now looked no different from a withered remains abandoned by the darkness. Her wrinkled skin was deeply branded with dark runes that continuously bled, undeniable proof of the crime of sacrificing her soul to forbidden magic. Octavia tried to use her torn, silk-gloved hands to hide her deformed face, but terror and despair had completely swallowed her last shred of arrogance. The Marrow House once swore to be the shield protecting the throne. Cassian spoke, his cold and majestic tone echoing through the cathedral, shattering all the fearful whispers of the noble crowd outside the doors. But you used the very power bestowed upon you to betray my beloved wife, to strip away my own flesh and blood, and to scheme the death of the final lives of the Veyr bloodline. You did not stain your hands with a sword, but with the most despicable deceit. The king took a step forward, his colossal aura forcing Octavia to smash her face against the freezing stone floor, her chest crumpling as she struggled to breathe. From this moment on, the title and lineage of Marrow shall be forever stripped from the history of Eldervale, Cassian decreed, every ironclad word carving deeply into the subconscious of every living creature present. The entire council that colluded with her to hide the truth shall be purged. Throw this traitor into the darkest dungeon, to await the day the silver moon's flame judges her filthy soul. From outside the cathedral, Nightbane Arden strode valiantly inside, followed by loyal guards who had broken free from the dark magic's illusion. The Wolf Knight discarded his dust-stained cloak, drew the silver sword at his waist, and walked straight toward Octavia. Bane's amber eyes blazed with the fire of vindication. He roughly grabbed the shoulder of the one who had orchestrated the unjust treason sentence against his father, dragging her mercilessly across the ground. Justice always arrives late, but it never forgets innocent souls, Bane whispered in a low voice just enough for Octavia to hear, before pushing her into a circle of sharp spears. Darkness engulfed the perpetrator as the dungeon doors closed, shutting the book on an era of lies in the Wolf Kingdom. When the chaos subsided, the crowd of nobles outside simultaneously fell to their knees, bowing their heads close to the stone floor. They were not only kneeling before an Alpha King who had reclaimed his full authority, but also before the lowly servant in a torn apron dress, the one who had just used her mortal, wolfless blood to forge the greatest miracle. The newborn prince in the solid gold cradle was sleeping peacefully, his complexion rosy and full of life. At the same time, the greatest mages of the castle stepped forward, trembling as they offered their confirmation regarding Ivy's half-gold, half-silver eyes. The little girl was not a cursed, demon-eyed child, but a rare bloodline listener who had inherited spiritual essence from the moon goddess, bearing the mission to connect and soothe royal souls. Dusk gradually descended, draping Eldervale in a brilliant, deep purple. Tens of thousands of beeswax candles were lit across the corridors, dispelling the desolate cold of the castle. Inside the throne room, all eyes were drawn to the highest dais. Clare stood there, having washed away the layers of blood and grime, adorned in a pale blue gown trimmed with silver thread, the signature colors of the Veyr bloodline. However, she made no effort to hide her flaw. The damaged skin behind her shoulder, caused by her adoptive mother's toxic potions, was now left bare, exposing the crescent moon birthmark shining brilliantly as an ironclad affirmation of her roots. She emitted no aura, nor did she possess fangs or claws, but the calm and unyielding demeanor of a mother who had walked through death radiated a strange power that no wolf dared to disrespect. Cassian stood beside her, holding a black velvet cushion in his hands. Resting upon that soft velvet was a small crown forged from solid silver, intricately carved with laurel branches. It was Princess Aurora's crown, the one that had been sealed in the silent room for 27 long years. "Aurora," Cassian spoke, his eyes brimming with unprecedented tenderness. "This kingdom owes you an apology, and I owe you a lifetime. Put on this crown, and reclaim the place that belongs to your bloodline." The entire great hall held its breath, waiting for the moment of her official restoration. However, Clare only looked quietly at the sparkling crown. She reached out to touch the cold silver branches, feeling the weight of power. She remembered the days living hunched over in the kitchens, remembered the night she desperately held her child while facing the oppressive auras of those calling themselves nobility, remembered the deaths of countless innocent children dragged into the cathedral simply to serve as test subjects for an absurd curse. "I am no longer Aurora, Your Majesty. I am Clare, Ivy's mother." Her clear voice rang out, resolute and without a hint of trembling. She cast her gaze around the great hall, looking straight at those who had once hurled insults at her. "I will accept this bloodline. I will accept this kingdom, but not by submitting to its rotting laws." Clare turned to face the entire council and the high nobles. "As the Princess of Eldervale, my first command is not to punish my enemies, but to establish an eternal boundary. From this night forth, I demand a new law be carved onto the sacred stones of the cathedral. It is absolutely forbidden to use the blood of any child, whether commoner or noble, in any royal magic ritual or sacrifice. Whoever violates this shall face the unforgiving flames of purgation." Clare's ironclad declaration made the clerics and nobles shudder in submission. In unison, they bowed their heads, swearing to obey. Cassian smiled, a rare smile that melted the layer of ice on the warrior king's face. He proudly lifted the silver crown, preparing to place it upon his daughter's ash-colored hair. But Clare gently caught the crown from her father's hands. She turned to Ivy, the 6-year-old child wearing a pristine white silk dress, obediently standing by the foot of the throne. Ivy's eyes lit up when she saw that beautifully sparkling object. Yet, Clare did not place it on her own head, nor did she place it on her daughter's. She slowly knelt on one knee to be at eye level with Ivy, smiled tenderly, and placed the silver crown on the stone step right in front of the child's tiny shoes. "Mommy, the crown is so beautiful," Ivy innocently whispered, reaching out to touch the silver laurel blossoms. "Yes, it is very beautiful, but it is also very heavy and cold." Clare caressed her daughter's soft hair, her voice as gentle as last night's lullaby. "Remember this, Ivy. Our bloodline is meant to protect fragile lives, not something to force us into a cage of power that imprisons our freedom. You do not need to wear it on your head to prove yourself, and you do not need to wear it to belong here. Your existence is already a priceless miracle." Ivy blinked her half-gold, half-silver eyes, wrapped her arms around her mother's neck, buried her small face in the crook of Clare's shoulder, and breathed in the familiar scent of snow. Behind them, the giant glass balcony doors were thrown wide open, welcoming the night breeze that carried the breath of the vast pine forest. The perfectly round silver moon hung suspended above the west tower, casting a haunting yet gentle light down upon the three figures drawing close together. Cassian stepped forward, spreading his broad and sturdy arms to envelop both his daughter and granddaughter into his chest. The scent of the northern blizzard was no longer violently cold, but became thick and protective, wrapping around the scent of first snow and laurel flowers, forming an unbreakable family bond. From the absolute depths of the powerful Alpha King's soul, a primal sound rang out. The kingdom's giant wolf stretched itself under the moonlight, holding its proud neck high. For the first time after 27 years submerged in tragic darkness, its howl was no longer a roar of torn agony, but soared long into the night sky, overflowing with absolute fulfillment and joy at having finally found its lost pups.